welcome to Ask the Educator, a podcast brought to you by Healthmark Industries. Are you a sterile processing technician or manager? Maybe you work in infection prevention or biomedical engineering. Whether you're a frontline tech, endoscopy tech, OR nurse, or surgical services administrator, you undoubtedly have influence in medical device processing at your facility. In each episode, we speak with experts from the Healthmark Clinical Affairs team, industry leaders, or special guests from the trenches to answer your questions and bring you relevant industry information, equipping you for excellence in medical device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, and I will be your host. Now let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ask the Educator podcast. This is Kevin Anderson, your host, and joining me for the first time as a Healthmark Clinical Affairs education specialist is Adam Okada. Adam, welcome back to the show. This is actually your second time on the show, but first one as a Healthmark employee. So welcome to the show, man.
I'm excited to be here. Yeah, it was a good time with Harry last time, so just happy to be back.
Yeah, we'll have to get Harry back on as well. He's such a great personality, a great speaker, and a very knowledgeable subject matter expert. But for this one, Adam, just since it has been so long, I know there's going to be people who know you from various experiences that you have, but can you just give us some background on your own, experience as a sterile processing technician, educator, all of that stuff? What's your background look like?
Sure. Yeah. So I started 15 years ago in sterile processing just as a frontline tech. I was frontline for about 9 years and then kind of worked my way up to lead tech, supervisor, manager, educator, and kind of I've done ordering, I've built case cards, I've kind of done everything there is to do in that department, held every position. I kind of wanted to, explore different things and, just try out different things within the industry. And, after that, I did go private sector and go with Beyond Clean. So I was there for about a year and then now with Healthmark. So I do have a lot of experience in sterile processing and very passionate about education. And that's why I love this podcast, As the Educator is all about sterile processing education. So.
No, that's great, Adam. And it's funny that you mentioned the education being a passion of yours. We had some discussion prior to this recording, and that was something that obviously was very prevalent in your background experience wise, but also just kind of a passion of yours. But I wanted to get into a little bit of why, because education in my mind, in the title of this podcast and the way I envision it is going to be education is a superpower, right? And there's reasons for that. One of the reasons that we discussed was how education had a direct impact on quality. This is something that isn't foreign to you. This is something that you've experienced in your own background. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into. So in what role, I know this is, going back to your 15 years in the hospital setting, what role were you in when you really noticed how this education played such an enormous role in quality in sterile processing?
So at my first hospital, I was lucky enough to have Sharon Rojo, who is another member of our clinical education team, who was my educator. So that was my first job, and my kind of first experience with sterile processing was to do things the right way. And, we had audits, we were getting checked, and we had to have a certain percentage of accurate trays. And, mistakes will happen. I've made mistakes throughout my career, and you kind of just learn from them and correct them and try to move forward and try to never make that mistake again was what I always told myself. And then when I went to my second facility, and I'm not going to talk about which facility it is or anything because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. The focus was not on quality. It was, we had kind of a series of managers who had come from outside fields that had nothing to do with sterile processing. So they were used to productivity being the main metric that you track things with. And the hospital does track productivity. So when they came in, that's what they were familiar with, and that's what they were pushing. So we had SPM was the system that we had, and they were pushing for 120% productivity with all these things. 120% productivity. And what I saw happening was as they were doing this, staff started to realize if I grab a circumcision set with 10 instruments, 12 instruments inside, I can get 6 of those done an hour. Whereas if I grab, tympanoplasty tray with 150 instruments inside, That's going to take me the full hour, and then I'm not going to get my productivity numbers.
Yeah.
So what happened is the quality started to dip. Nobody wanted to do the big trays. So only were certain people that were willing to take low productivity would do those trays. And then everybody else did these small dinky trays that weren't even priority trays.
See, we're smart. We'll find ways around the system.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I think everybody, that's kind of human nature, right? We just try to figure out ways that we can like game the system. And like, we realize this is going to make my day a lot easier than if I, do this headache of a tray, which is going to have missing instruments and all this stuff. So
yes. Yep.
The productivity numbers went up. They were consistently going up. And the downside is that I was in charge of the audits at that point. And I wasn't necessarily doing all of them. The lead techs and myself were doing them, but I noticed the numbers started to dip. And so I could see at this facility that we had started around 98, 97, pretty consistently 90s all across the board. And then once that productivity started getting pushed and those numbers started to rise, the audit numbers went. So it was like a cross where the productivity was going up and audit rates were going down. And that was where I realized, and really, I think the passion for sterile processing really kicked in. I was trained the right way. I knew the right way to do things, but the passion didn't kick in until I saw it being done wrong. And I saw the wrong things being pushed in the department. And, it was a battle. It was a couple of different managers that we had at that point. I think it was like a series of 3 in 3 years. And none of them had any experience with sterile processing. And I was trying to tell them, this is the wrong direction we're going. And all of them were saying, well, we can do productivity and have accuracy. We should have both. And I was like, that's great. First, let's focus on accuracy. Let's not push the productivity until we get that part nailed down. But I think that was the experience. And then as a manager later on, I also saw the opposite happen. I came into a facility that was, for lack of a better word, behind the times. And they were doing things a little bit strangely. We brought in some certified techs like travelers. We hired some new techs and tried to train them the correct way to do things, encourage them to get certified. And we saw audit numbers kind of do the opposite. We saw starting around 50% audit rates going up, kind of bouncing around a little at first, but ending up around 85%. So those audit rates, like the data that you capture and looking at those trays is really important. The data is important. And then obviously pushing the right thing, pushing education, pushing accuracy. I've seen those numbers go down. I've seen those numbers go up. So I'm a big believer in doing things the correct way.
That's awesome, Adam. So just to clarify for listeners who may not kind of understand what you mean by audits, can you share what an audit looked like at your facility?
So we basically working off an audit form, and then SPM and other tracking systems will have like little tracking modules for audit rates. So basically you're opening a tray. You're examining it for accuracy. Is the external integrity good? That was always the first thing. Is the wrap intact? Is the tape good? Are there no holes in it? And then we'd look at the internal integrity. Is the count right? Are there any instruments that are soiled? Are there any instruments missing? Are there too many? So basically you're examining every single aspect of that tray and making sure that it's 100% accurate and safe to use on a patient. And anything that kind of deviates from that 100% accuracy, that would be a finding or an audit mistake or something that would go as a negative audit. So you're looking for those positive things as you're doing those audits and opening those trays.
So your audit on these trays would actually be before it made it to the OR, is my guess. So after your entire process, but before it went to storage or to the OR, at least the procedural area, you would take it before it got there, right?
Yeah. So, there's 2 different types of those audits. There's reactive audits, which are the tray got opened in the OR and there was an error. And so we mark that as a reactive audit.
Okay.
And then there's proactive auditing, which you're taking a tray that's sterile and would be used, but you're going to pull it down and audit it to make sure. So yeah, there's both of those, but the proactive audits are the ones that I'm a believer in. You kind of got to get ahead of it. I always think that the hospitals that do the root cause analysis, where they're looking backwards at something that's already happened, the mistakes already happened, or the injuries already occurred, and you're trying to prevent it. Those are usually the lower performing hospitals. Whereas if you have that failure modes effects analysis, those are the hospitals that are kind of ahead of the game, right? They're looking ahead at the potential failures and then stopping them before they occur.
Try and prevent it. Yep. Just like how the modernization of healthcare is focusing on preventative, and as should we, that just makes sense. But I definitely wanted to highlight what you said in the beginning of your story, how you had you had an increased focus on productivity, and at the same time, as a direct result, you noticed a decrease in quality. And I think that's a really important point, because I think we've all been there in our experience where you have had managers or leadership that put that focus on productivity, and then you start dealing with the gaming of the system. It makes a huge difference when you use productivity as a tool as opposed to as the end all be all. Productivity is like one of those things I think of where it's a necessary evil. We need it in order to help us understand what our workers are doing, but also to help us make our argument for new FTEs and things like that, speak to our finances, speak to our budget, things like that. I don't think it was ever meant to be that pressure cooker that we've turned it into. And in your case, 120% was the goal. Like, yep. That's more than everybody's giving more than 100%. That's just going to kill your labor force. That's going to kill your workers. I mean, I don't understand how that could ever be a target, but maybe that's common. I don't know, but that's interesting that you saw that direct relationship take place right under your nose and had that experience, and then with the opposite occurring not long after that, where you had brought in more certified techs and you started to notice, an increase in quality. So armed with that knowledge, what did you guys do with that when you found out that, hey, all these travelers that we need, they're coming in certified, they're coming in trained and all of this, and it's having a direct impact on our quality? Some people would probably think or assume that travelers would decrease quality, but in this case, they were increasing your quality. So what did you end up doing with that when you noticed that was the trend?
So when I came in, it was a very small workforce, and I had 3 different hospitals at that point when I had come in. And at one of the facilities, I know there was only 3 full-time employees, and we increased that to 7. So we over doubled the staff. And of course, to do that, we couldn't just hire off the street. There wasn't enough technicians in our area to just double the workforce. So we had to look outside, and we had to bring in some travelers. And what the travelers helped me do was identify the problems that, as a manager and at splitting time between 3 different facilities, I couldn't always see and be on the floor and see what issues there were. As a manager, I would highly recommend not only walking the floor, but actually doing the job with the technicians, like actually seeing the way the workflow works, seeing how do I have the right supplies? Am I running all over to get these things? So when I was in the department, I would see that. But the travelers helped me also say, hey, these are other things we're seeing. When you're not there, this is what's going on. And, especially if they come in certified and they kind of have that baseline of knowledge of why we do what we do, not necessarily what we're doing. It's very easy to train a new technician to do the right thing. But if they don't understand the why behind it, why is this important for patient care? It's very easy for them to start skipping steps. We've seen that a lot in places without, good management, is that technicians just get into this routine of skipping those steps or just doing things differently than the standards. They may have been taught the right way and trained the right way, but they're just not doing it that way. And so that's what, sometimes those fresh eyes, travelers coming in can see those things that, hey, things are not right. You should take a look at this process or take a look at this. And that's, for me, that was seeing that increase in staffing to where productivity was no longer needed to be like 200% for people. That got people to slow down and take a look at the processes, and that's what fixed it. And then in the opposite, the more I think about it, that first situation was completely the opposite. We had cut staff. When I got there, there was, I believe, 23 certified technicians. Everybody in the department was certified, and it was kind of a mandatory certification facility. And then by the time I left, that had been cut to, I think, 13 or 14 certified technicians. They had a lot of tech ones that were not certified. They had cut staffing so much that, we were just crazy trying to catch up with that. And I remember my boss was using it as an example because I was in management at that point towards the end of time, and I would go to these management meetings. Sure. And he was actually called out by the CEO as, look at how great he's doing financially with this department. This department has cut, about 100% from the budget, literally lost half of our budget because he cut employees. And as the people working in the department, I was seeing this and just being like, Oh my, like he's being labeled as a hero, when to us, I mean,
Oh,
he's like,
wow.
destroying this department. The OR is unhappy. They're constantly calling because there's all these mistakes. And
Mm.
it was just a situation where I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what not to do as a manager. I learned a lot of how to look good to the CEO if you really need to. um, but yeah, just seeing that situation and then seeing the opposite where I came in and doubled the staff, which actually increased the budget, and they kind of gave me the free reign to do that if I needed to, but it did increase the quality. And I think that was the big point. Was I've seen it go down, I've seen it go up, and it really has to do with the people you have, how well they're trained, what, that education level is. And then what is your focus? Is it productivity? Is it money? Is it whatever? Is it looking good to the boss, or is it patient care? And we always say it's patient care. Everybody will say that if you ask them, but do you really follow through and make
Put
that
your
your
money where your
priority as a
mouth
department?
is, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Practice what you preach, right?
It's so true, though. I mean, I got to admit, in my years of managing SPD, I was not good at cutting budget. I was only increasing budget. And the reality is, just as you said, like, when you go into a department as a new manager or leader or whatever, most of the time, the experience is that our departments are behind. They're behind on investment. They're behind on staffing. They're behind on tools. They're behind on capital equipment, all of these things. And then what's the other big thing? Oh, they're behind on education too. I mean, it was funny that you mentioned this emphasis on certification and how important that was to moving the needle for quality for you. In the department that I took over, and there were certified staff that were there for, over a decade or two, and they actually let their certification lapse. Like it became unimportant, and the focus had become more like, let's clear out this mountain of instruments,
Yeah.
not worry about CEs and not worried about being certified. And of course that was a point of contention when I came back into that leadership role. We had to obviously refocus the group. But do you remember any like the actual metrics and stuff that you noticed right away? I know you tossed some around earlier, but specifically when you really put an emphasis on certification, like were you able to achieve 100% certification again? And at that point, were you able to see a marked difference in the quality?
We were never able to get to 100%, but what happened was we had brought in some travelers that were certified that kind of helped us get over that initial problem areas where we had, I mean, it was wholesale changes. We had to change our way our loaners were getting checked in. They were changing the way that the trays were getting processed. They were changing the ways. I know we talked kind of offline about some of those issues. Their IUSS rate was a little bit out of control.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
so we had to change a lot of different things. And so I really credit the staff with coming, buying in with me. I did have to kind of convince some of them that this was the right direction to go. And we did bring in a lot of new technicians. Now, a lot of them were, somebody knows so-and-so, or somebody,
Sure.
is this is my brother or my, husband or whatever. There was a lot of different like family connections that we had.
Yeah.
But we brought in good staff. We hired, I think, the right people. And then we really made that focus on training them and getting them certified. And once we saw those new technicians, like there was some dips and some lags when they were training and there was mistakes made, as there always is with new technicians. But the more that we stressed the certification, the more people got certified, the more the numbers started going up, because they started realizing this isn't just, oh, this is my boss doing this to, try to keep an eye on us. This is what's right for the patient, because this is what it says in the manual. This is what we should be doing. And they kept bringing ideas to me too, because it was like, hey, I read this in the manual. We're not doing this. Why aren't we doing it? And I was like, we should. You're absolutely right. Let's do that. Let's, if it's in the manual to do it, let's do it. So, new technicians, new certified techs will see those things, and I think it's always good, because it's, as much as a manager can try to be up on every single standard and every single, new thing that's coming out, the AAMI amendments have been a new thing this last year.
Sure. Yeah.
And a lot of managers, I'm sure, have still never heard that there's new amendments to AAMI, because they only have that document. They're not really connected to the online education. And,
Sure.
it's news to them when we go in and say, hey, did you hear about these new AAMI amendments? No, I had no idea there was. So
It's true.
It's difficult with all the things you have going on, all the meetings you have to go to, budget and answering for I would go to, I think, dozens of OR meetings per month for various things, various groups or, money things and new equipment. We had robotics coming in. We had a lot of meetings about that. It's really hard to also stay up on everything, which is what I love about podcasts in general. Just, it's something that's just quick, easy, and you just get that nice little snippet of education. Even if it's just a small piece, you get that little piece and it's easily digestible. So, different ways to get people education, I think, is definitely something that I've kind of built my career around, figuring out the kind of unique ways to get that education out there.
Well, yeah, especially in today's world, there are so many different ways, whether it's podcasts, YouTube videos, webinars, seminars, like you name it, there's an option now. And that's a good thing. We want education more accessible. You mentioned, the managers. I live that life. I know exactly what you're talking about. And it is hard to stay on top of things. So if you have other people in your department looking out for all the same type of information and education, you're better equipped. You have more of the ability to find that new information and implement it and all of that. So, and just to confirm what you were saying, I mean, I can tell you just from my own experience, we in our department made it a goal to go to 100% certification. It was a little bit easier because we had a small group. It was 13 FTEs, including myself, but we did it. And along the way, we did see trends with quality as well, always moving in that right direction. And like you said, there's peaks and valleys no matter what. But when you get to the point where you're having, only anywhere between 2 and 10 quality findings in the operating room a month, like that's pretty darn good, So at least at our facility, I know everybody's facility is different. 10 or 2 to 10 could be a weekly or daily thing at somebody else's place and still be good depending on how busy you are. But the point is, education's a huge factor in quality. And I did just want to give you the last say on this before we wrap up. What is it you think our listeners should really do? What can they do in order to really utilize education as an instrument of quality in their department?
Well, I think the first thing you do is you get data. If you just have this sense of how things are going, or, hey, we're getting a lot of phone calls from the OR, but you're not really sure, those kinds of like feeling things are not something that's going to connect with the staff. You really need to have the numbers. And then what I think is really important too, is to engage the staff in that education process. As a technician that was on the floor and doing it, I remember like trying to get 100%. And when I wasn't at 100%, or I had a month without that, Sharon used to do stars. Sharon's a very, very big on like visual aids in the department. But I remember having months without that star of 100% and like just like getting upset about it. But you kind of buy into this idea of like, I need to get to that level of quality and excellence. I knew the right way to do it, and I wanted to be there. But it doesn't work unless the staff wants to do it. So again, engage the staff in that process. Data is key. Obviously, having those numbers and things that you can report on and have that as a team goal. And I think for the buy-in for staff, you really need to connect that patient on the table. We always say this, but it's if you can connect that patient on the table to the work they're doing in the department, which is hard to do because a lot of times we get into this routine of just, I'm assembling instruments, I'm listening to music, I'm talking to my friends over here on the side, or I'm in Deacon Tam and I'm just rocking out, listening to Kevin on his podcast. You get kind of stuck in this routine of like forgetting what we're there for and forgetting why we're doing it. So constantly bringing it back to connecting that patient. If you can get those technicians to feel what the patient is feeling when they come in, and this is one thing that, one of our hospitals actually had the management go and talk to the patients. And I always felt like when I had to go to a patient and say, hey, my name is Adam Okada, I'm the manager of sterile processing. I just want to let you know that it'll be our instruments that are used on you today, and you're in very good hands here at the facility. I had to tell that to a patient. And there were times early on where I was not very confident in what I was saying.
Wow.
But seeing that look on their face, they're nervous, you have their family around them, they're scared. And being able to see those patients in that setting gave me a different perspective. And I think that's the perspective we need to give staff. I always think the staff should be doing that too. Have a staff go up and talk to a patient before their surgery and see, how important what we do is, because if we're not doing our job, if we're getting in a routine, that's the person that's going to suffer. So if you can connect that, I think that's how education really improves. We're not sociopaths. If we see a person that's scared and about to go through something, being very vulnerable and open to harm being done to them, we want to do the right thing for them. It's in our human nature that we want to. So I think that's probably what I would tell people, is connect that human to what we're doing.
Well, that was a really creative and powerful way to do that. And I see how you would do that as a manager, but to maybe bring along some techs with you, I think that would be a very, very powerful way to help put themselves in that gurney in the stretcher and sort of see the fear, like you said. What a great idea. I hope that there's somebody out there that will actually try that. I would love to hear somebody try that and let us know how it goes, see if they get a little bit better buy-in from the staff and engagement. But I think that's a perfect place to end the episode, Adam. I just want to thank you, obviously, for joining the team. You're going to be a great addition. And I also just thank you for being on the episode and sharing your knowledge with us.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Happy to be here.
That wraps up episode 66. Just to recap, I spoke with the newest member of the HealthMark Clinical Affairs team, Adam Okada, about how education can be used as a sterile processing superpower. What do I mean by that? Adam shared how the increase in certified techs in his former department led to a significant increase in sterile processing quality metrics. He also pointed out the importance of collecting quality data so that you can see how your initiatives, including education, will impact your quality scores. This is a critical step to any quality improvement initiative that you don't want to skip. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out other educational resources at hmark.com and click on the Education tab. Thank you all for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use. Instructions for use. Instructions for use.